The Nile, a ribbon of life. It snakes through the desert, its waters a source of life for the people of Egypt. But the Nile also holds secrets. Beneath its placid surface, darkness lurks. Ancient stories whisper of forgotten cities, of tombs swallowed by the sand. They speak of Pharaoh Ameneth, Ameneth. His name is uttered with fear, a hushed whisper on the lips of storytellers. He was a ruler of immense power, a king obsessed with immortality. He craved life beyond death, wanted to rule even in the afterlife. Ameneth demanded his priests cheat the gods and grant him eternal life. They built him a tomb, a monument to his ego and his fear, the Temple of Ameneth, a place of shadows and whispers where the air hangs heavy with dread. The temple was filled with riches beyond measure, treasures meant to ease Ameneth's path through the afterlife, gold, jewels, precious artifacts. But the temple held more than just treasure. It held a curse. The priests, fearful of Ameneth's ambition and the dark magic he commanded, betrayed him. They buried the temple, sealed it away from the world. They spread tales of a terrible curse, a warning to anyone who dared seek the pharaoh's treasure, the curse of Ameneth, a whisper in the sand, carried on the wind, a warning from the past. Centuries passed. The desert sands swallowed the city, burying it beneath a blanket of oblivion. The stories of Ameneth and his cursed temple faded, becoming little more than legend. But legends never truly die. They linger in the shadows, waiting to be reawakened. And in the small villages that clung to the edge of the desert, the whispers remained. They spoke of shadows that moved in the night, of voices heard on the wind. They spoke of a darkness that clung to the ruins of the past, a malevolent presence that watched and waited. The Shadow of Ameneth. It haunted the dreams of the villagers, a constant reminder of the power that lay sleeping beneath the sands. Some dismissed the stories as the ramblings of old men, tales told to frighten children. But others, those who remembered the old ways, knew the truth. They knew that the desert held secrets, that some things were best left buried. They knew the curse of Ameneth was real. The curse was more than just a story. It was a palpable thing, a weight that pressed down on the hearts of those who dared to speak of it. It was a feeling of dread, a sense of unseen eyes watching, of ancient power waiting to be unleashed. And it was waiting for someone foolish enough to disturb it. Ameneth's obsession with eternal life had driven him to madness. He had consulted with priests, sorcerers, anyone who claimed to hold the secrets of immortality. He offered them riches, power, anything they desired in exchange for their knowledge. He built temples, performed rituals, sacrificed countless lives, all in pursuit of his goal. He believed that death was an insult, an affront to his power. He would not submit to the will of the gods. He would become a god himself. His reign would last for eternity. His name would be feared and revered forever. This was his obsession, his consuming desire, and it would be his undoing. The priests, initially eager to please their pharaoh, grew increasingly disturbed by his demands. The rituals he required were dark, blasphemous. The magic he sought was forbidden, dangerous. They feared the consequences of tampering with forces they did not understand. They feared Ameneth's growing madness. They saw the darkness that was consuming him, the way his obsession twisted his soul. They knew that his quest for immortality would lead only to ruin. They had to stop him. But how do you stop a pharaoh who believes himself to be a god? The village of Apep lay nestled against the foot of a towering dune, a cluster of mud brick houses baked hard by the relentless sun. It was a place of scarcity, where life clung to the edges of the desert, a constant struggle against the elements. It was here that Neferet lived. She was a woman forged in the crucible of hardship, her spirit as unyielding as the desert itself. Her brother Thoth lay burning with fever, his breath shallow gasps that tore at Neferet's heart. The village healer, old and weary, could offer little hope. A sickness of the blood, he'd croaked, his hand trembling as he pointed to a rare herb that grew only in the heart of the deep desert. Find it, and he might live. Fail, but the herb was costly, a king's ransom for a pauper's hope. Desperation gnawed at Neferet. She knew of only one way to obtain such a sum, a way that whispered of danger, of ancient curses, the whispers of Ameneth's treasure. That evening, as the sky bled into 1,000 shades of orange and crimson, a stranger rode into Apep. He was tall and wiry, his face hidden beneath a rough-spun hood. He spoke of a lost city, of a pharaoh's tomb laden with unimaginable wealth. He spoke of a map, recently unearthed, that pointed the way. Neferet listened, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The whispers she had dismissed as mere stories now held the weight of salvation, or damnation. She knew the risks, the ancient tales of Ameneth's curse. But what choice did she have? The stranger, sensing her desperation, leaned closer. "I've assembled a team," he rasped, his voice rough as desert wind. "Men with skills. We need someone like you, Neferet. Someone who knows the old ways, who can read the signs." He produced a small leather-bound pouch, its surface etched with faded hieroglyphs. Neferet's fingers trembled as she reached for it. Inside, nestled amongst fragrant herbs, lay a fragment of ancient papyrus. The map. It depicted a sprawling temple complex, its corridors and chambers a labyrinth of intricate symbols and cryptic warnings. At its heart, a single chamber glowed with an ethereal light. Ameneth's burial chamber. "The shadows of Ameneth," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. The stranger nodded, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "They guard the pharaoh's treasure, but they can be overcome. Will you join us, Neferet, for your brother's sake?" The desert stretched before them, a vast ocean of sand and sky. The sun beat down with unforgiving intensity, baking the land and testing the limits of their resolve. Neferet rode astride a sturdy donkey, her brother's fate a heavy weight upon her shoulders. The stranger, who introduced himself as Amenethet, proved to be a skilled guide, navigating the treacherous dunes with an uncanny intuition. He led them through scorching canyons, past wind-carved rock formations that resembled mythical beasts frozen in stone. He knew the desert's secrets, its hidden paths and treacherous illusions. Their small band consisted of 3 others: Ipu, a wiry man with quick eyes and even quicker fingers, a master of traps and ancient mechanisms; Bek, a giant of a man, his face etched with the scars of countless battles, his loyalty as unwavering as the mountains in the distance; and the stranger who had brought them together, Amenethet, his knowledge of the ancient roots their only guide through the treacherous landscape. Each night, beneath a canopy of 1,000,000 stars, Neferet would study the map, deciphering its secrets, her fingers tracing the faded ink. The warnings were clear. Beware the shadows of Ameneth. They guard his tomb and punish the greedy. A shiver would run down her spine, but her resolve never wavered. She had come too far to turn back now. Her brother's life depended on it. After weeks of travel, they found it. A single sandstone archway, half swallowed by the sand. The entrance to Ameneth's tomb. The air grew heavy, the silence absolute. Even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath, respecting the presence of something ancient and powerful. The archway was carved with hieroglyphs, warnings etched in stone. Neferet felt a chill crawl down her spine as she traced the faded symbols. She recognized the warnings, the curses laid upon those who dared disturb the pharaoh's rest. "Death awaits the greedy," she murmured, her voice tight with apprehension. "Just stories," Ipu scoffed, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger, meant to scare the weak. He pushed past Neferet, his eyes gleaming with avarice. "Let's see what treasures old Ameneth has in store for us." He wedged a crowbar into the crumbling stone, prying at the entrance. With a groan of ancient stone, the entrance gave way, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. The air within was stale, thick with the dust of centuries. It smelled of decay and something else, something ancient and unsettling. Neferet took a deep breath, steeling her nerves. There was no turning back. Torches flickered, casting dancing shadows on the tomb walls. The passage they followed was narrow, the air close and oppressive. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the soft thud of their footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Neferet ran her hand along the smooth wall, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings. Scenes of the afterlife, of gods and monsters, flickered past in the torchlight. She felt a presence here, something watchful and cold. It was as if the tomb itself was aware of their intrusion, its ancient silence a form of watchful waiting. Their progress was slow, each step fraught with tension. Ipu, ever impatient, cursed under his breath as he disarmed a series of pressure plates hidden beneath a thin layer of dust. The Priest of Ameneth did not believe in making things easy, he grumbled, wiping sweat from his brow. Amenethet, his eyes narrowed, pointed to a series of symbols etched into the ceiling. They believed in deterrence, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Tests of worthiness, traps for the unworthy. The tomb opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in the flickering shadows cast by their torches. Pillars, carved with the likeness of jackal-headed gods, stretched endlessly into the darkness, their eyes seeming to follow the intruder's every move. The air was heavy, the silence oppressive. A low hum vibrated through the chamber, a sound both ancient and strangely mechanical. Neferet felt a shiver run down her spine. It was the sound of the tomb itself, she realized, the sound of its ancient mechanisms, dormant for centuries, now stirring back to life. This place, Bek muttered, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. It feels wrong. He scanned the shadows, his eyes narrowed, his usually stoic demeanor replaced by a flicker of unease. It is a place of death, Amenethet said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. A place of power. We are trespassers here. We must tread carefully. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew colder, thick with a palpable sense of dread. Whispers seemed to emanate from the walls, fragments of ancient words that sent chills down their spines. The shadows themselves seemed to writhe and contort, taking on menacing shapes in the flickering torchlight. It was Bek who succumbed first. It began subtly, a change in his demeanor. The usually stoic warrior grew withdrawn, his gaze distant, his eyes haunted by something unseen. He started muttering to himself, his words a jumble of ancient Egyptian and something else, something dark and guttural. "Bek!" Neferet called out, her voice trembling with a fear she couldn't quite name. "What is it? What do you see?" He turned to face her, and a gasp escaped her lips. Bek's eyes, usually warm and full of life, were now cold, empty. His features seemed to have hardened, his face locked in a rictus of pain and something else, something alien and terrifying. And then, in a voice that was not his own, a voice that echoed with the weight of ages, he spoke. "You dare disturb my rest?" Terror, raw and primal, seized Neferet. Bek's voice, twisted and warped, was barely recognizable. The words seemed to claw at her mind, each syllable thick with ancient malice. His eyes, once filled with warmth and loyalty, now blazed with a cold, otherworldly fire. It was as if something ancient and monstrous had taken root within his soul, twisting him from within. "Ameneth!" Amenethet breathed, his face ashen. He staggered back, his hand instinctively reaching for the amulet he wore around his neck. "He walks among us." Ipu, his usual bravado evaporated, fumbled for his dagger, his eyes wide with terror. "What sorcery is this?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Bek, it's me, Ipu. Do you remember?" But Bek, or rather the entity that wore his flesh as a gruesome disguise, merely laughed. It was a hollow, chilling sound, devoid of any human warmth, that echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the ancient stone walls like the mocking laughter of a vengeful god. "Fools!" the voice rasped, each word laced with contempt. "You dare trespass in my domain? You will face my wrath." Panic seized the group. Neferet knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that they were no match for the power that now possessed Bek. Ameneth, the God King, had awakened, and he was not pleased. "We have to get out of here!" she shouted, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her heart. "This chamber, it's his. He's strongest here." She didn't need to tell them twice. Amenethet, his face pale but resolute, grabbed Ipu's arm and pulled him towards a narrow passageway that branched off from the main chamber. "This way!" he urged, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to find the burial chamber, the source of his power." They ran, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passageways, the flickering light of their torches painting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed on the tomb walls. Behind them, they could hear the heavy thud of Bek's footsteps, each one a jarring reminder of the relentless evil that pursued them. The tomb became a nightmarish labyrinth, a twisted reflection of Ameneth's tormented soul. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable sense of dread. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching and contorting, whispering secrets in a language Neferet couldn't quite understand but felt deep in her bones. As they fled, Neferet was plagued by fleeting visions, flashes of chaotic imagery that assaulted her senses. She saw Ameneth, not as the desiccated corpse he surely was, but as a living king, his eyes blazing with unholy power, his hands dripping with the blood of sacrifices. She saw the priests, their faces contorted in fear and despair as they performed their dark rituals, binding their pharaoh's soul to the earth. These visions, vivid and terrifying, were not her own. They were Ameneth's memories, fragments of his shattered soul, leaking into her mind, seeking to break her will, to bend her to his will. Each vision left her weaker, the line between reality and nightmare blurring with every step. They stumbled into a chamber unlike any they had seen before. The air here crackled with raw power, the stench of ozone and something ancient and foul assaulting their nostrils. The walls were covered in grotesque murals, depicting scenes of unimaginable chaos and destruction. In the center of the chamber, a single altar stood bathed in an ethereal green light. As Neferet approached the altar, drawn by a force she couldn't resist, she saw it. A golden mask, its features twisted into a grotesque mockery of a pharaoh's visage, lay upon the altar. The mask pulsed with a sickly green light, its eyes seeming to follow her every move. "The soul vessel," Amenethet gasped, his voice hoarse with awe and fear. This is where he bound his essence, his Ka, to the mortal plane. Neferet reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched the mask. A jolt of energy surged through her, sending her reeling. As she lay there, gasping for breath, a new vision filled her mind, clearer than any before. She saw Ameneth, not in his mortal form, but as a being of pure darkness, his essence intertwined with that of a colossal serpent, its scales the color of night, its eyes burning with malevolent intelligence. Apep, the god of chaos. "He made a pact," Neferet whispered, her voice filled with horror and understanding. Ameneth bound himself to Apep, drawing on the god's power to cheat death. She looked at her companions, her eyes wide with fear. The curse. It's not just a story, it's real, and it's far worse than we could have imagined. The chamber pulsed with a malevolent energy. Neferet could feel it tugging at the edges of her sanity, whispering promises of power in exchange for her soul. She saw the reflection of the green light in Ameneth's wide, terrified eyes. Ipu, his face ashen, clutched his amulet as if it were a lifeline. "We have to destroy it," Neferet said, her voice hoarse. "The mask. It's the key to his hold on this world. But how?" Amenethep's voice shook. "The magic protecting it." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The air crackled with unseen force. Neferet could feel the weight of Ameneth's gaze upon them, cold and calculating. He was toying with them, savoring their fear. A low growl echoed through the chamber, emanating from the possessed Bek. His body contorted, muscles spasming as if an unseen force were twisting him from within. His jaw stretched impossibly wide. A silent scream trapped behind lips pulled taut. Neferet knew they had precious little time. Bek, or rather the abomination that wore his skin, was changing, morphing into something monstrous. Scales, the color of polished obsidian, rippled beneath his skin. His fingers elongated, morphing into claws that scraped against the stone floor. "Ipu," Neferet said, her voice firm despite the tremor that ran through her. "You're the expert. Find a way to destroy that mask." Ipu, his eyes darting between the transforming Bek and the pulsating mask, scrambled towards the altar. He examined the intricate carvings that adorned its surface, his nimble fingers tracing the lines of ancient power. "There has to be a way," he muttered, sweat beading on his brow. "A weakness, a release mechanism." Amenethet, his gaze never leaving Bek, drew his sword. The blade glinted in the eerie green light, a beacon of defiance against the encroaching darkness. "Buy me some time, Neferet. He won't be able to resist you for long." Neferet knew what Amenethet meant. Ameneth, for all his power, was still bound by the remnants of his humanity. He craved what he had lost: life, control, dominion. And he saw in Neferet a means to reclaim it. She stepped forward, placing herself between the possessed Bek and the frantic Ipu. The air grew heavy, charged with a palpable tension. The growls emanating from Bek intensified, morphing into guttural words spoken in a language both ancient and terribly alien. "You cannot hide!" the voice hissed, echoing with Ameneth's rage and desperation. "Join me, Neferet. Embrace the power that is rightfully yours. Together we will rule this land once more." Neferet met his gaze, her own unwavering. She saw the flicker of recognition in those serpent-like eyes, the echo of the man Ameneth had once been, now twisted and consumed by his own ambition. "You are not a king," she said, her voice strong and clear. "You are a prisoner of your own making, and this tomb, this curse, is your legacy." Neferet's words struck Ameneth like a whip. His form, contorted and monstrous, flickered. Bek cried out, a tortured sound that tore through the chamber. The golden mask on the altar pulsed erratically, its green light casting grotesque shadows that danced with the fury of a storm. "You defy me?" Ameneth's voice, a guttural growl, reverberated through the chamber. "You, a mere mortal, dare to defy a god?" "You are no god," Neferet retorted, her voice unwavering despite the fear that coiled in her gut. "You are a shell, a parasite clinging to the power you stole, a king who fears the embrace of death." Her words, laced with truth, struck a nerve. Ameneth thrashed, his rage echoing Bek's agony. He lunged, claws bared, but Amenethet intercepted him. The clash of steel against bone rang through the chamber, a desperate counterpoint to the symphony of madness unfolding around them. "Ipu!" Neferet screamed, her eyes darting between the struggle and the pulsating mask. "Time is running out!" Ipu, his face a mask of concentration, worked feverishly. He had located a series of glyphs etched into the base of the altar, their sequence familiar yet terrifyingly alien. He muttered under his breath, his fingers tracing the lines of power, his mind struggling to comprehend the ancient magic. Suddenly, the chamber was filled with a blinding light. Neferet shielded her eyes, a scream trapped in her throat. When she dared to look again, she saw Ipu sprawled on the ground, his face pale, his chest heaving. The golden mask lay on the floor, a single crack running through its malevolent visage. "It is done," Ipu rasped, his voice weak but triumphant. He is bound. But as Neferet turned back towards Ameneth, her blood ran cold. The light from the mask had faded, but the chamber seemed to pulsate with a new energy, a darkness that emanated from the possessed Bek. His features, twisted into a mask of rage, were now eerily still, and his eyes, those cold reptilian eyes, were fixed on Neferet.